everybody. We're glad you're here today. Thank you for joining us for the NWRA Corfa monthly special this time, an extra webinar, and one that is very timely, I think, for those of us who are trying to amplify the message of the importance of National Wildlife Refuges. Before we get started, Eden, do you want to tell us about what's coming up?
Yeah, so as you guys are kind of coming in and everything, we just wanted to drop this in the chat. Our Ryan Prize for Refuge Friends Award is up and running, and we're requesting proposals. It's going to be up to $6,000, and there's an application on our website. The proposals will be due Friday, May 30th. So I'm just going to put that information in the chat real quick. So this is for the O'Brien Prize. And this is for all Refuge Friends groups. And then the other thing we wanted to send to you guys is that our Refuge Strong merch is here. And I think Joan's wearing her shirt as well. I don't know if you can see it. So I'm just going to drop the merch in the chat as well. And that benefits the Refuge Association and the Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates. So if you want to show unity for the refuge system, feel free to purchase some hats, sweatshirts, t-shirts, and also we have Hatchery Strong t-shirts as well for fish hatcheries. So I'm going to drop that in there too. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Eden. And while we're talking about the chat, will you please put your name and the friends group that you are affiliated with in the chat so we know we can get better acquainted with everybody. And with that, I'm going to turn the focus over to Bill O'Brien, and he's going to introduce today's webinar. Bill, it's all yours.
Thank you. Matthew, are you ready to go with the slide deck? Thank you. So I'm Bill O'Brien. Matthew Emmer and I will be co-presenting today. Matthew is the president of the Friends of Savannah Coastal Wildlife Refuges and a member of the board of the Coalition of Refuge Friends and Advocates. He's in Savannah, Georgia. Next slide, please, Matthew. I'm a retired writer-editor. From 2010 to 2023, I worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the National Wildlife Refuge System branch of communications. Before that, I was a journalist for 3 decades. I'm in Arlington, Virginia. Today, I'm going to give a quick 15-minute overview about letters to the editor and op-eds. Then Matthew is going to talk for 15-20 minutes about how to write one. And then we plan to have 15 minutes for questions from you. Next slide, please, Matthew. So what's the difference between a letter to the editor and an op-ed? Generally speaking, a letter to the editor is reactive. It's a short opinion piece written to a publication or website in response to a previous article on that site or in that publication. An op-ed is proactive. It's a longer, more ambitious, more complex opinion essay that is not necessarily in direct response to a previous article. However, both letters to the editor and op-eds should be about topics that are timely in the news. At large media outlets like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the distinction between a letter to the editor and an op-ed is quite clear. At smaller media outlets, the distinction blurs. Some small to medium-sized outlets run longer op-ed-like letters. We'll be talking about both today pretty much interchangeably. Okay, so why write one? The reason to write one is to get National Wildlife Refuges and your refuge in particular squarely into the conversation among the community of readers and followers of the media outlet. You want to remind those people in your community that refuges and your refuge in particular are relevant. Why now? Well, I think as most people know, this is the most precarious time for conserved public lands, including National Wildlife Refuge in decades. It's just high time to speak up for the concept of wildlife conservation. It's easy to make your refuge and what it does and what it offers timely if you look for opportunities to do so. You have to be on the lookout. Who should I write for? By the way, it technically should be whom, but I didn't want to say that. To who should I write for? First of all, I would say your local newspaper, whether it's in print or online. It is the lifeblood and in many ways the connective tissue of your community in ways that you might not immediately realize. Your neighbors read it, and importantly, community leaders and lawmakers read it. It's just you want to be in the conversation that your local community newspaper is having and reporting on. And sometimes it takes the form of a listserv online. Sometimes it's something that once a week lands on your doorstep. But that is more important to your community than you might imagine. And it's a great place to make sure your refuge is part of the conversation. Similarly, you could go for a state or regional newspaper, something a little bit further from your community, but still relevant to your community. For instance, Matthew could try to write, who's in Savannah, Georgia, and the Savannah refuges on the coastal refuges in Georgia and South Carolina, could try something for either the Atlanta Constitution Journal or maybe the South Carolina Columbia newspaper or Charleston newspaper. And for the same reason, you want to get your refuge into the conversation that people in your state and region are having, if at all possible. And it's important to do so. Another area you could look for are specialized print or online magazines or blogs that are specialized in various areas that would be relevant to what your refuge does and offers. So think about media outlets for outdoor recreation enthusiasts, for hunters, for anglers, for birders, for wildlife photographers. These blogs and magazines, you could either write a letter to the editor or an op-ed to them to try to get your refuge onto their screen. If you want to try to find out where some of these things might be, just Google, for instance, Google most popular nature photography magazines. And let's say you're at Bosque, Del Apache National Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico. You find them a nature photography magazine and just make sure that next time they say something about something that could be relevant to Bosque, I mean, it doesn't have to be directly relevant. They could be talking about photographing birds, and you could say, by the way, in a 2-paragraph letter to their editor, just say, we have great birding opportunities down here at Bosque, and don't forget us. There's a million ways you can work yourself into a conversation. Another specialized magazine, this is a little bit farther afield, but many magazines have a magazine devoted to the state. And by definition, that magazine cares about the lands and peoples and things in that state. So National Wildlife Refuges are a big part of almost every state, not as big as, say, national parks, not as big as the big cities, but they are a very relevant part of every single state that they are in. And so if you can somehow insinuate your message and your opinion and your place, your refuge into that. So I'm thinking like Texas Highways is a magazine, probably one of the best state magazines in the country. There's a thing called Our State in North Carolina. There's a Georgia magazine, there's an Ohio magazine, or even a more regional magazine like Southern Living. That might be a stretch, but there may be a way that something that's written in Southern Living applies to something that happens on a refuge that you could somehow or another respond to an article especially with a letter to the editor with a magazine that big, that you could get your refuge onto their plate. And then the final thing I'll say, final place I would suggest writing to is what do you call it? Your state or local tourism bureau. They have blogs, and you can respond to their blogs on the Layton Stone, but definitely, this is not really an op-ed or letter to editor, but definitely make sure your state and local tourism bureaus have notification of every single event, public visitor-oriented event you have on your calendar. And in fact, you could even get, hunting season begins, fishing season, whatever. So anyways, what you want to think in terms of whom to write, influencers who are passionate about where your refuge is and what it offers. All right, so now, in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly run through a dozen tips. Next slide, please, Matthew. Thank you. However, this entire slide deck and my remarks will be available afterwards if you wish. By the way, many of the things I'm going to mention here apply to any piece of writing that you do, from an email to a social media post to a cover letter, even to a book. But so real quickly, I'm not going to read exactly what's said here, but just look at the screen here and take a minute. But tip number one, familiarize yourself with the outlet. Do not skip this step. It's vital. If you submit a piece that's not suited to the media outlet's demographics and style, editors will sense it immediately, and it's unlikely to be published. Tip number two, many or most media outlets have specific guidelines and instructions regarding submitting a letter to the editor or an op-ed. Follow those closely. If you don't, you put yourself at a disadvantage. If you can't find such guidelines, read a few issues worth of letters and op-eds in the publication to get a feel for them, and or contact the outlet directly and ask for guidance. There's a next slide, please, Matt. Tip number three, think about precisely what you want to say. There's a tried and true axiom. Writing is thinking. Don't just start. Think about what you want to say. This may be the most important thing I say all day. Think before you start. Tip number four, most pieces of writing try to do too much, especially opinion pieces. If you make one point cogently, you're doing better than most. And surprising and on-point facts are very important to making your point. Be selective, though, however. If something doesn't directly bolster the point you're trying to make, even if it's kind of really interesting and hard to do, leave it out. If it doesn't bolster what you're saying, don't clutter the letter or op-ed with it. Next slide, please, Matthew. Keep it short. Those are the lengths that I would recommend. But when you're doing this, keep in mind that the reader is devoting his or her most precious commodity to reading your words, their time. So respect their time, respect the reader. Don't waste their time. Make your point concisely. If you think about it, when's the last time you got to the end of a piece of writing and said, I wish that had been longer? It happens, but it's pretty rare, and I can't remember an email when it's ever happened. Tip number 6, write for the audience. Don't write past the audience. You want to inform people, engage them, not confuse them. If people can't understand what you're saying, it's unlikely they will support what you're saying. Everyday plain English is best for newspapers and news sites and most other outlets. However, If you are writing for a specialized magazine or blog or website, the audience is specialized. So your language can be specialized too. Next slide, please, Matthew. So if possible, cite, when you're writing a letter to the editor in particular, cite a recent article from the media outlet that relates to the point of your piece. This automatically makes the letter or op-ed timely, and it gives a feeling of bringing your refuge into a continuing conversation. It also shows the editors that you're a reader and follower of the site or outlet, and that's important to editors. Tip 8 is self-explanatory, I hope, but nothing destroys a writer's credibility or muddies the message like sloppiness or inaccuracy. Next slide, please, Matthew. Stick to the issue at hand and avoid personal attacks. This is a little bit out of favor in some quarters of our country right now, but I would say no name calling. You can debate people's policies and approaches, absolutely, but don't demonize individuals. There's just no point in it. And in this letters and op-ed setting, attacking individuals, one, is generally ineffective, and it could get you or the media outlet in legal trouble. Tip number 10. This is a very writerly thought, but you guys are going to be writerly people if you follow any of this advice, and Matthew is a writerly person. Once, and he agrees with this 100%, once you think you are done, go through the piece and selectively trim out unnecessary and redundant words or thoughts. My rule of thumb is if the piece isn't about 10% shorter as a result of this, you're probably not being self-critical enough. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. So you want to make sure it's clear to everyday people. So everybody needs an editor. Everybody needs a friend who can be self-critical, or can be critical of, constructively critical, pardon me. So if it's possible, run the piece of the letter or the op-ed past someone who knows nothing about National Wildlife Refuges. And if they can't understand it, you might want to consider simplifying or clarifying it. And finally, make sure you include your name, town, phone, and email so the editors can reach you. Make clear that all of that is not for publication. Most want your name and hometown, but you don't want your email or phone going in the newspapers. But if the editors can't reach you, if they have any questions, then it's unlikely they're going to run the piece. So regarding contact information, make sure you follow the media outlets guidance. Next slide, Pete, please. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matthew. Excuse me. Let me just say one thing. I'm back and forth when I'm calling him Matthew or Matt or Matthew, and I apologize, Matthew, because I think Matthew is what you prefer. I'm sorry.
No, I
Take it
respond
away, man.
to just about anything. Thank you, Bill. So, and I want to say on that last point, yeah, contact information usually will not be published, but just so we are very clear, most editors won't publish any sort of op-ed or letter without at least using your name. They want to make sure that they're actually quoting someone real and not just making up something, so that people can understand who's actually saying what's being said. So just understand that when you submit something, they will definitely want to at least have either your name and or your organization if you're representing your organization. But yes, no, you don't want your cell phone number or your email in the piece. So yeah, we kind of split this program up into two parts. We thought it was really important to get kind of those facts and those tips from Bill. And let's be very clear, Bill is the expert. I'm just a guy who really likes seeing my words in print. And I'm passionate about refuges and my complex in particular. But so really take those tips to heart. And then the second half is going to be me kind of giving a walkthrough of kind of a practical use guide about how I've approached writing op-eds in the past. So trying to put it into more practical terms for you. But definitely choose a topic, choose a publication, read those rules. Those are all very important basic starting blocks. But get started. Start jotting thoughts down, even if it's just rough outlines. The first step is the most important step. But remember, no one's going to go to bat for your opinion more than you. If you have something to say, you need to say it. It's just really, I can't stress that enough. But with all that being said, let's get started. So an op-ed that we ran in the Savannah Morning News, a local newspaper for me, a couple years ago was in response to Pride Month. And we had joined in with a lot of other organizations, including the Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service in celebrating Pride Month. And we even had altered one of our main logo, which you kind of see at the bottom. The left one is our normal logo, and obviously the right is the Pride variant based off of the historical colors that they use in the Pride flag. And we were getting a lot of blowback. I mean, nationally, everyone was getting blowback, but even us locally, we got a little bit of blowback. So wanted to write something in response. And let me say first, I have never written a letter to the editor specifically. I've only written op-eds. And I was talking to Bill about this, and I think that's probably primarily what you'll be doing, mainly because a letter to the editor is usually in response to a previous publication. And most people just don't write about National Wildlife Refuges like they should. So there's just nothing to respond to. So op-eds are just typically what I go to because I'm trying to get and introduce topics out into the world. So these are op-eds. But what we were saying was that we support Pride Month and we represent National Wildlife Refuges. Others think that we shouldn't do both, and we want to support our position. So that's kind of the basic outline of what we're trying to say. Stick to about 500 words or less, and where we're going with it. So I'm just kind of walking through and highlighting the different things and breaking it down in terms of how I think about it. So you start with an open. How are you going to introduce the topic to your audience? And the basic idea of, many institutions have adopted these colorful versions of their logos in support of Pride Month. We have two. Others, with the National Wildlife Refuge System, including the Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, and other organizations, have also been doing this. And we've all been kind of attacked for, quote unquote, needlessly injecting these values into our public lands. And then I go to say, we would suggest that the concept of inclusion is intrinsically connected to the very, definition of public lands. And our intent is just to call attention to a vibrant community during their time of celebration. So there's the open. That's the issue. It's very clear. And I've already made the point that, this is where we stand on that. So then we move kind of to the next thing, factual support. And where I went with factual support was I leaned into the mission statements of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service in the fact that they work on the continuing benefit of the American people, or that they conserve cultural resources and values for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. So that's kind of the lean of the facts, right? That's a factual statement. You can look that up, and there's backup anywhere you look for Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. That's what they say that their mission is. So then I interpret that it's the duty of these institutions to provide a historical and natural context of all individuals, regardless of race, sexual orientation, or any other defining characteristics, that it has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with sexuality. It's about gauging with all people. So there's the factual support. There's a little bit of, contextual interpretation. And that kind of summarizes, the first statement there. So then I need to tie it together. These colorful logos and inclusive statements are simply a sign to a historically marginalized community that they are safe to be themselves in nature, that they can let their guard down, that these are amazing places, and that they were set aside for all Americans. And that the message that we hope to impart to this and all communities, because we're not just supporting, Pride Month, we're supporting everyone. It just so happens that we're supporting Pride Month now, and that's what's caused a little bit of a ruckus. But that the point is that you are welcome here just as you are. That ties it all back together, and then underlines and underscores the main point. Now, I have to say, Bill mentioned I believe in editing, and I did heavily edit this to begin with. But if I were to run this year, and I don't know, maybe we might have to, this is a paragraph that I might edit now. So this is just proof and concept that you're never done editing. There's always something else that you can look back on and take out. And I still believe in this paragraph. I still like this paragraph and how it reads, but it doesn't quite 100% fulfill the mission of why I'm writing this. But basically, the summary is I quote a Greek proverb that says, "The society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in." And then I take that and I morph it into, we too become a great society when we provide a resource for others that we may ourselves never need or use. So whether that's a library, a friendly face to talk to, or a National Wildlife Refuge open and free of judgment, that we have the highest moral obligation to provide these resources for every individual. It's a lot. I still, like I said, I still believe in that. It's a little preachy. So in version 2.0, I might strike this paragraph, but I might use it for something else. Who knows? But the real point is we get to the quote unquote real ending. Public lands, by definition, are for everyone. That's why we support Pride Month. And then here you can clearly see that this was something that that I wrote, that I presented to the board of directors. We talked about it, they approved it, and so we signed it collectively as the board of directors from our organization. So kind of seeing it all on the page, we wanted to show you kind of a breakdown, how much space is being taken up by each little section. So there's the open. I follow up with a couple little paragraphs of factual support. You tie it all together. Then you have this fluff thing, and maybe you like it, maybe you don't. And then you have a sign off. But at the end of the day, what we ran was 370 words. And just for a point of reference, if you take out that little fluff paragraph, it knocks it down to about 257. So that's in good fighting shape. It gets the point across. Newspapers are happy because they don't have to dedicate too much more space to it. But that did run here in Savannah. I did also want to mention one of the other facts that and tips that Bill brought up was the idea of running it by someone who's unfamiliar with refuges. And I did this in two ways for this piece. First off, I always use my wife. I think she's the more level-headed, even-keeled. She's my rock. And I know when I get a little too far, ahead of my skis, she can bring it back. So I always run everything by her. And I will say, she's less likely to try to stir the pot, if you will. She did, like I said, I did edit about 50% of this down in the first pass. And she really wanted me to kind of just narrow the focus and not be too argumentative, because it was something I was passionate about. Obviously, I wanted to write about it. But more importantly, I did run it by a friend that I have here in Savannah that is a part of the Pride community. Because my thing is, I don't need to fight two fronts. If I'm not representing people in the way that they want to be represented, I'm doing a disservice to myself and to them. So he has no connection to Refuges, but I took him out for a beer, set him down, plopped down the manuscript in front of him and said, if you read this tomorrow in the newspaper, how would you feel about it? And he gave me very honest feedback. And we talked, through a few things, and he was happy and I was happy. Now, again, that's just a small representation. I'm not saying it spoke to everyone, but it's the kind of steps that I think are important to take in this process. And it just backs up one of Bill's points. I was so happy when he put that point in as part of the presentation. So I wanted to speak to that. So I know that's a very hot button topic kind of piece. So I wanted to give an example of something that we can probably all, more easily speak to. And that topic is refuges are underfunded. I think that's the kind of the underlying thing that we would love to get onto the mind of everyone, especially those who are in places that they can, make changes to this. And so I'll preface this by saying this is not published yet. And I wanted to preface that by saying that there are many different ways you can go about thinking about how you want to write. And you might be thinking like, well, I don't even know where to begin. This is not really my cup of tea. Where would I even come up with some of these words? And this is actually what I did was I took testimony that I submitted to Congress a few years ago, and I just kind of diced it up and reframed it to put into this presentation. So if you've ever written anything to Congress as far as like testimony or anything like that and submitted stories or ideas from your refuge, from your point of view, that's a great place to go for content. You've already written it, you've already thought about it. Take some of that, rework it, and then you might have an op-ed ready to go. So with that being said, your local paper to be determined, 500 words or less. And what we are saying is our national wildlife refuges are woefully underfunded. They do so much work for us, particularly with ecosystem services, and we should do more to care for them. So, and this is a different way of opening. This is a big open, straight into factual support. Basically just saying public lands are our nation's greatest treasure, our proudest achievements, and they are truly American, but they're not treated the same. The National Wildlife Refuge System per land acre is granted just over $6. The National Forest Service receives $36. The National Park Service receives $55. And even with that, what's not being counted is all the marine acres the refuge system oversees, which if you just took the marine acres, is an acreage 2.5 times larger than the parks and the forests, combined. So just huge, factual statement there. Most people can understand dollars and cents. And it's not that I'm trying to denigrate the other two or say that they're receiving too much money, but there's just a clear discrepancy here and calling attention to that. And then I just raise the stakes a bit that they're our greatest carbon sinks, our greatest natural filters of drinking water, our greatest sponges, et cetera, et cetera. And we're dangerously close to losing them if we don't start investing in their protection and subsequently our own. I do like to call back to the human element and the stakes around the human element, because a lot of people, it's kind of esoteric when we start talking about public lands and refuges, what they mean to us and what they're doing for us. When it comes down to it, a lot of people vote and, build out, their priorities, for their family based off of the dinner table items. What's hitting me in the pocketbook? What's going to affect my family, et cetera. So I try to bring that back down, that it's not just about protecting this for ducks or alligators or any sort of other, creature. We're also protecting ourselves. So that's just something I also try to frame up. This one, I decided to go a little bit more poetic, that writerly spirit. So I went into the direction of, it's not just the ecosystem services, by the way, $27 billion plus annual benefit to our nation that's in jeopardy, but our nation's character, our American spirit. And then I kind of wax poetic about Savannah, about how each refuge contains tidal salt marsh. No other place in the world has the same unique charm. It's the embodiment of legend and lore, the subject of song and verse, the reasons that millions visit and the privileged few stay. A little pat on my shoulder, I guess. Just one opportunity to witness the hypnotic sway of the grasses, the late afternoon colors that awash the horizon in shades of gold, the rich browns of the pluff mud and that clings to your feet and binds to your soul, and your heart will ache at the thought of ever losing it. So really leaning into the pathos of it. And I'm a big believer of all of Aristotle's modes of persuasion, the logos, the ethos, and the pathos. But I really like hitting the emotional aspect whenever you get an opportunity to do that. And then I go into a big question. And again, it's a little bit of exaggeration, but it's a big question. What will we lose as a country if we allow these refuges to slip away? What would that say about us as a society when we cannot prioritize that which we cannot create ourselves? And so it's not about just saving it for us. We've already been blessed with this, but saving it for future generations who may miss out through no fault of their own. what kind of America are we going to choose to leave them? So again, it's poetic, it's a little bit exaggeration, it's definitely leaning into pathos, but it's still tied to the original message of we can't let these things slip away. And I think we all have these feelings, somewhere inside of us, and it's just a matter of crafting them and getting them out into the world so that other people can try to feel the same feelings that we're feeling about, our special places. We're dedicating all this time and effort into them, and we want others to do as well. So then you bring it home, and again, I'm really, just slugging you with the pathos. I want to make it personal. So then I go into, just the idea of why I support these refuges. Answering the big question, the promise of a better tomorrow. And then getting back into the poeticness of where alligators bellow in their moss-draped oaks, snowy egrets dancing in tidal pools, hardwood giants, all of that kind of wrapping into it. And then also redoubling at the very beginning, I support these refuges because they provide us so much more than we give them. And then the little snippet and a shout out to Cheryl, because I told her that she had a great story that she likes to tell Congress people when she meets them about why she does what she does. And I took that nugget of an idea and I kind of morphed it into my own thing. And so I dropped that in at the end. But I support these refuges because my children still run with open arms to the sea, because their eyes still twinkle at the sight of fireflies, and because I want their children one day the chance to see the same magic. And so now I ask you for your support of these, our last wild places. And that's kind of the big end. So this one is different in a lot of ways, because like I said, it does take on that emotional aspect. And you get a chance, if you want, to be a little bit more creative in how you talk about them. But the idea, and Bill talked about this, is you're fighting for people's attention. And so part of, what grabs our attention is anything that's entertaining or engaging or just interesting to read or watch. And so part of that is grabbing their attention and holding it so long that you can make your point to get that across. And so in the first one about Pride Month, it was a lot more factual and more dry about this is just why we're doing this. This one, I took the tact of let me reach in and tug at the heartstrings. I find in my experience, if you can move someone through their emotions, you're more likely to move them farther. And I mean, we see that both ways, people moving in the wrong directions based off their emotions. But if you can focus them and move them in the right direction, they're going through the idea of pathos and emotions can really be useful. So kind of breaking this one down, you have the factual open. And again, that's a little bit bigger. I did go into a lot of poetic license, but I summarized it with one big question, and then gave a little space to bring it home and wrap it all back up. And this one topped out at 461. So still within the 500 word limit. I'm sure Bill could redline this one like crazy and get it down to a fighting 300 or 250. But I like it. But again, this was literally almost verbatim, just changed up a few of the paragraphs and a few word choices, what I had submitted to Congress. So I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I could run this tomorrow and it would probably be published, and especially in my local paper. And they're a little bit more starved for attention these days, so they'll probably just about run anything. But I think people would appreciate it, and it chooses, it gets the point, home. But so those are two kind of examples. There's a million different ways you can go about it, but the main thing is you have to start. You have to start with the first step, and then move forward with it. And I did want to kind of touch on the idea of the imposter syndrome. It reaches us all. It hits me pretty heavy, most of the time. Who am I? Why would anyone listen to me? What kind of authority figure like do I, show to the world? And I wanted to kind of address that one, but mainly, point one, you are an authority. You do represent something important, and your voice matters. So I would, channel that into whenever you're thinking about this. Don't let that imposter syndrome kind of sneak in, because it'll stop you before you get started really fast. But I also wanted to say, just to remember that it's not up to any one person to save the world entire. We just have to be willing to try to move it forward, even if it's just an inch. And if all of our voices take a step towards that goal, that we can make a difference. So even if you're in the smallest place, the smallest town, in the smallest media market, with the smallest refuge, that doesn't matter. That your voice still matters. Your writing still will reach someone. And if you just change one person's opinion about your refuge, it's done the job. So don't let that get you down. If you get rejected, that's okay. Try again. Fix it. Try to resubmit it if you can, or just find a different outlet. Maybe the outlet's not the right fit. I guess that's one of those writerly things. Rejection is a part of the deal. You're not going to get published every single time, but especially those local newspapers, they really do want to hear from you, and you do represent someone. So that kind of wraps that portion up. We did drop our emails here, and we are willing to take any questions. I don't know if we saw anything in the chat.
Before we go to questions, if I could, Matthew, if it's all right with you, I'd like to, first of all, second a couple of things you said. First of all, every single voice here matters, and your voice matters within your community, possibly more than you understand. But it does, or more than you'd immediately understand. Your voice matters in the community, so don't be afraid to dive in. The second thing that Matthew said that I really like is the emotion part of it. You want fact, but also emotion is hugely important. I want to push back on one thing you said, Matt, right at the beginning. And you said that you don't write many letters to the editor, you write more op-eds. Because I don't remember exactly why you said you don't, but I'm going to say to everybody here, look for ways you can write letters to editors. Letters to editors that are a paragraph long can sometimes be really, really effective. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 examples. If there's an article about the local economy, either increasing or decreasing or whatever it is, and that is an opportunity. It has nothing to do with National Wildlife Refuges on the face of it, but that's an opportunity to say, by the way, did you know last year that Tensas River National Wildlife Refuge brought in $78 million worth of visitors to go hunting for deer along the Mississippi River, or Bosque del Peche brought in X amount of money to Socorro, New Mexico. So look for ways that your refuge contributes to the local community. Or if there's an article about storm or flood damage, that it's talking about it cost, there was $5 million worth of damage from the flood 3 weeks ago, and that they're just tallying it up. You can write an article that's a little letter. By the way, understand that if our refuge wasn't there, that number would have been much higher, because we took on X amount of acre feet of floodwaters that would have otherwise ended up in the streets of town X, or the refuge prevented a storm surge from coming into a suburban development. The point being, look for ways to insert your refuge into the conversation through letters to the editor. I'll give 2 more quick examples. Hunting season opens. Just say, so there's a story about hunting season. I noticed that hunting season opens. Just to remind people, last year, whatever the number is, 150,000, whatever the number is, hunters use the refuge for hunting or fishing or whatever. Look for ways to insert yourself into the conversation via letters to the editor. Final one, a Bass Pro Shop opens in town, okay? Say, hey, look, the Bass Pro, good to see that. By the way, one of the great places to go hiking in this neighborhood or fishing or hunting or whatever it is X Refuge. So just like that. And I will say, I think several people on the call may know, a few years ago, a colleague and I wrote a piece called, and it's still up on the Fish and Wildlife Service website, called 11 Ways National Wildlife Refuges Make Life Better. If you Google that or find it on the the Fish and Wildlife Service website, look at those 11 ways and say, how does my refuge do that? And then tell your community how your refuge does that. Okay. So I just want to get off on that point. And then one little quibble, Matthew, if I can. You used the term ecosystem services. To me, ecosystem services is something that probably 95% of the people on this call know what it means, and probably 5% of the public knows what that means. Instead of saying ecosystem services, my humble opinion, say whatever that service is rather than ecosystem service. That's just a that's a buzzword for inside. It's a little inside baseball, I think. But those were the thoughts that occurred to me. But thank you for great ideas there. So if anybody has any questions, maybe how are we going to do this? Raise hands.
We've got some questions in the chat, so let's start there.
Okay, Cheryl, why don't you bring them on?
I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa says, I heard Matthew mention seeking board approval prior to submission. As a Friends member, should I be coordinating any submissions with my refuge PR specialist?
So the only thing I'll say to that is, first off, I mean, I do usually run it by our liaison at least. And I have a good working relationship with our project leader as well. So I would probably run it by him too, just to say, this is what's going to come out. It's going to have our name on it. It's more of a heads up because, and you can take this as, with a grain of salt. And everyone has their own working relationships within the service. But my humble opinion is that you are an independent 501c3. You are your own organization, and no one speaks for you but you. So if you have written something and you're going to sign it with your organization's name, and especially with the board of directors, then yes, your board definitely needs to sign off on it and be aware of it. Depending on what you're writing, I can't say this in all cases, but depending on what you're writing, you're typically just trying to move the ball forward as far as getting the word out. You're not usually being too argumentative against the service. We typically don't like doing that. But I usually just do it as a common courtesy to give them a heads up to say, hey, our name is going to be out there. This is what's being said. If you have really big reservations about it, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm more of we are an organization, and we'll do what's best for us, and conversely, the refuge that we support.
Thanks, Matthew. Bill, anything to add to that?
No, thank you.
Okay.
It's a little outside my bailiwick.
Okay.
Right now.
Okay. Cindy says, great session. What would you advise for a bi-state refuge? Can we submit the same op-ed to different papers? I'm thinking of us wanting to get it published in both Illinois or Wisconsin. Or would you advise us to get a variety of our board members to submit similar op-eds to different local and regional newspapers? I'm thinking also that it would be good to have the writer be a resident of the state in which the paper is published.
Bill, I'll let you tackle that one.
Yeah, so going the end first, it would be definitely much more beneficial that the writer is from the state in which the publication is based. In terms of most large newspapers, many magazines, many journalistic entities either say in the guidelines or don't say in the guidelines whether they will accept what's called multiple submissions. In other words, most large newspapers will not let you blanket the world and hope one person. You have to write it for them. And so generally speaking, you are going to be better off writing it just for, pick a publication and write for it. In terms of Wisconsin and Illinois, or maybe it's up or miss, I would pick an outlet that you like and you want to aim for, and maybe you have 3 or 4 in mind, and submit it once to the first one. If they don't like it, then submit it to another one. This is op-eds. Letters to the editor, same thing, but you want to be, you have to sort of be reading these publications and following them so you can react on a dime. So I wouldn't, you don't, I would discourage in general what I call multiple submissions to the same, of the same thing to different papers. I would not, or different media outlets. I would not do that. Did that answer the question? I hope.
You got a thumbs up. I think you got it answered. Matthew, anything to add?
No, that was good.
Okay. Janelle is piggybacking on the first question, on Lisa's question. She is an executive director and also her organization's public relations department, and she doesn't always run every messaging writing by her board. Do others have a process or a policy that suggests that they should or requires them to do so? Matthew, does your board have a policy?
No, we do not. And I would imagine, probably given the size of most friends groups and how many policies and processes that just haven't come across our table yet, that most friends groups probably don't. I won't speak for them. But I will, kind of take that question and say, as an individual, you don't have to run anything by anyone, right? If you're writing for yourself and you're sticking your own name on it, it's up to you. Now, most people usually take into consideration, if they do have a position, that people will naturally just say, connect the dots and say, oh, he's Matthew Emmer and he wrote this. I don't agree with it. Oh, a quick Google search shows that he's president of this organization. Now I'm not happy with that organization. That's just, it happens. So I usually try to frame that and, be your best self. Taking this out of writing and onto public streets, I try not to get into road rage incidents. Not that anyone's going to recognize my face because I'm not that important, but just in case anybody connected the dots back, I'm just trying to be, my best self. So that being said, if you're sticking your own name on it, you typically are free to do what you will. If you're going to represent anyone, then I would want to include them in the process. So if you're representing your organization, I would definitely run it by your board. Or if you do have a policy that suggests that you do that, but we do not. I would imagine. I don't know, Joan, if we have any policies in the Corfa website that suggest anything about messaging or writing.
I don't know, Matthew, if we do. There are a few board manuals in the resource center of the Corfa website, and I just personally don't know if they address the public, any publications. But Friends of Sherburne has a very extensive board guidebook. So if you want to go to the website and look that one up.
Okay, thank you. Bill has just a comment for Matthew. Perhaps the derivation of your thought is the quote, "It is not your work to change the world, but neither are you free to abandon it." This is a paraphrase of a statement attributed to Rabbi Tarfon and I can't pronounce it correctly, in Yiddish, so I'll say it in English, Ethics of Our Fathers. Thanks, Bill, for putting that in.
No, I love that.
Janelle says, I think the challenge we have when sharing impactful pieces is the lack of details that Bill is suggesting. Number of hunters, number of anglers, and so on. How do others get around not having numbers like that are specific to your site rather than depending on national numbers? Or do you just rely on the national numbers?
If I could address that for a minute, unless something has changed since I was with the National Wildlife Refuge System, visitor service manager at every National Wildlife Refuge should have access to those numbers. Those numbers are provided to the national headquarters from the local refuges every year. Those numbers are there. Economic impact is once every 5 or 7 years, I think. I don't know that. So I can't do the economic impact, but the number of anglers, the number of hunters, that is something that and the total number of visitors, period, is something that the Refuge Visitor Services manager should have. And if, again, we are in times, unprecedented times, and I know that a huge number of people left the Fish and Wildlife Service just last week. So I don't know where all this stands. And so I'm acknowledging that something might have changed, but the refuges every year, once a year, report to Fish and Wildlife Service headquarters their numbers. And so they should be available for, sometimes they're not available. Fiscal 25 should be available. Fiscal 26 isn't going to be, but by now, fiscal 25 should be available. So visitor services managers should know that. And if not, contact the National Public Affairs at the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they would be able to direct you to where those numbers are.
Thanks, Bill. Joe says he has a valuable tip. Joe, do you want to come off mute and tell us your valuable tip?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I wish I could say it was my tip. I spent 21 years in daily journalism, and if you can see this book, this gem here, I know Bill at the very least is familiar with this. Yeah, thumbs up.
Yep. Oh, yeah, saw that.
And I've spent the last 22 years writing reports, which aren't nearly as exciting as writing newspaper stories and editing them. But one particular tip in there is just brilliant, and I think everybody should remember this in everything they write, and I'll quote it. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph, no unnecessary sentences. For the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires not that the writer make all his sentences short or that he avoid all detail and treat his subject only in outline, but that every word tell.
Amen.
Thank you, Joe. You
By the
brought
way,
back some.
say congratulations to Virginia Reddick for me, all right?
Yeah, that was a real long. I just joined the Friends
The
board.
refuge manager at Forsyth just retired the other day.
Yeah, not quite when she wanted to. Let's just put it that way.
And Joe, someone's asking what the book. Could you hold the book up or just say the name of the title?
Yeah, it's called. It's very. You can see how yellowed it is. It's. I got this back in 1979. It's The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, and White is E.B. White, the
Yep.
famous author. This book was originally published more than 100 years ago, and then really put out for mass market back in 1959. And it's just brilliant. Some of the technical style points in there may not agree with certain newspaper styles of the day, but the writing portions of it are as relevant as ever.
Well, real quick, while we're talking about books, two I recommend for anybody who really wants to get serious about writing. One is called On Writing Well, in addition to what Joe just said, On Writing Well by William Zinsser. And a second one, I'm forgetting the author right now, but it's called Don't Be Such a Scientist. It's about communicating about wildlife conservation and conservation in general. Don't be such a scientist. I wish I could remember the author's name, but those are two other books about writing.
Great, thank you. Who can I ask? Eden, can you look those books up and maybe put a link in the chat? Thank you.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thanks. Okay, Karen has a question. As National Wildlife Refuge supporters, we understand the emotional aspects and want to communicate them. We can all relate. However, people looking at public lands as lands that could provide resources for members of the public to profit from, such as mineral extraction or those who would have various interests in privatizing public lands, how can we potentially best address those?
Yeah, I mean that's the biggie, right? That's what's on everyone's minds now, especially those out west that have more flat lands that look really appetizing to developers. I would say it's really about reframing the stakes. Anyone can look at a piece of land and come up with 50,000 different ways of using that land. I would, try to find a way to connect with the fact that just because you may see a blank piece of land does not mean it's not doing anything. Does not mean that it's just inert land just sitting there waiting for something to happen. That it all plays a part of the ecosystem that we're trying to protect. And that's something I really try to stress. Especially today, is it's not just that we're protecting these lands just for ducks or wildlife or whatever. That it does something more for all of us. And so if it's a buffer into a more environmentally protected area that really needs a buffer from something else, or if it's it's a hidden feature that it's actually storing carbon, or it's actually cleaning your water by draining it through certain types of sediment. And again, that's getting a little scientific, but the idea is that just because it could be something else doesn't mean that that's the best use for it. So I would stress to find different ways. Down here, I try to stress the fact that just because you lose an acre of wetlands, it's not just that, oh, well, some wetlands go away, that there's all these other things that happen. And, Bill kind of talked about that, if you lose these wetlands, then, you have more storm surge or something like that. Typically when you're talking to someone that's more interested in just bulldozing wild places for progress, they're probably someone who's more willing to relate to something else. So, in a deep red area like South Carolina, where a few of my refuges are located, a lot of people are big onto their military installations, like Parris Island. It's right by the coast. They have problems with sea level rise. And that's something that I can pivot from and say, well, if you help us protect these wetlands, those wetlands will help protect your military installation. And we all want to, be protected together. So I think it's just whatever your unique circumstance or your site situation is, finding that thing that you can kind of latch onto and redirect and reframe the message to say, what are the costs of taking away this refuge or this public land for the temporary or whatever benefit that they're saying that's we're going to get from it. Like Okefenokee, that titanium mine, it's titanium like dioxide or whatever. It's the kind of stuff that like whitens paint or whitens your toothpaste. Well, could we not live without that, but protect this really important ecosystem? I think that's a better trade-off than, oh, well, at least my teeth will be white, but the environment will be destroyed. So just trying to find those quick trade-offs.
Thank you, Matthew. Bill, anything to add to that? We're at the top of the hour, so we're
Yeah,
about to wind
we are
up
at
here.
the top of the hour, and I think Matthew said it very well. It's a difficult question, made more difficult in recent months, and it's always been a difficult question, but Americans don't think long-term as typically, and it's a challenge. I don't have anything really to add. Matthew said it pretty well.
Okay, thank you, Bill and Matthew, for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. I hope everyone's motivated to start thinking about that op-ed piece or looking for something in your local paper that you can respond to or react to as a letter to the editor. And you have both Matthew and Bill's contact information on the slide. When you get the slide deck, if you have questions, they have graciously offered to try to help with anything they can. So thank you to both of you. Thank you to all of you for attending today. Just a quick reminder, Eden, who all is supposed to stay on for our follow-up meeting?
Oh, Cheryl, I actually sent an additional link because I figured
Oh,
we
okay.
could close it down in case anyone tries to join for our normal webinar time.
Okay, all right, good idea.
Just to add one thing from my point of view as a now outsider, if any of you email me and would like to talk about your specific refuge, I have a pretty good idea about almost all the refuges around the country, and a pretty good idea of a lot of the communities around the country too. So if anyone wants to just email me and set up a time where we could talk and just kick around ideas for 10 or 15 minutes, have at it.
Thank you, Bill. That's very gracious of you. What an opportunity. You better get on it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.